Welcome to the Night Visitors, where we share purportedly true accounts of interactions with vampires and other supernatural predators. I'm James, a paranormal researcher and lifelong vampire enthusiast, coming to you from Transylvania. Join our Facebook group, the Night Visitors Vampire Research Society, and engage with fellow vampire enthusiasts. The story that follows is a true account with names and identifying details changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Tonight's story comes to us from Guangdong, China, from a rural area outside of Guangzhou, and it takes place sometime in the 1890s. I have long been interested in world languages, and one of the languages I've studied is Cantonese. For a time, I had an online tutor from Hong Kong who, like me, was interested in the supernatural and had a vast knowledge of Chinese ghost stories, Taoist mysticism, and Asian tales of the supernatural. She taught me quite a bit about Chinese vampires and how they differ from their European counterparts. The following story was told to her by the boss of a company where she worked, whose great-grandfather personally experienced the events in question. Towards the end of the 19th century, there was a young rice farmer named Ming who lived in a small village outside Canton. He was engaged to marry a young woman from his village, but found himself in a bad financial situation and wanted to make money to be able to offer his future family a better life. Ming had a sharp mind for business and had the idea of setting up wholesale contracts with grain distribution companies in British Hong Kong and Portuguese Macau to sell his rice. With a few coins in his pocket, he set out by foot for Hong Kong, a journey of about 3 days. As night fell on the first day, Ming wandered into a village and asked locals if he might spend the night in the temple as he had no money for the inn. The locals offered to take him into their homes, but he refused, not wanting to be a bother. They exchanged some nervous glances, but ultimately agreed. The local priest explained that the temple was dedicated to the star gods Lu, Fu, and Shu, but it was only used for offerings during Qingming and the Mid-Autumn Festival. He led Ming into the temple and said that he could sleep on the floor in front of the altar and that he would be back early in the morning to see how he had passed the night. Ming was grateful and set up camp at the base of the main altar below the watchful gaze of the star gods. He was exhausted, and sleep claimed him almost instantly. After only a few minutes of blissful sleep, a loud hissing noise coming from beneath the altar awakened Ming. He sat up to see a jet of green mist shooting up from the ground, from which a giant man-shaped figure emerged. The menacing figure had deep hollow eyes that seemed to alternate in appearance between black inkwells and burning red coals. Its body was green and covered entirely in a coat of fine white hair. It glared ferociously at Ming and began to leap towards him in a menacing manner, with its arms outstretched, brandishing razor-sharp fingernails. A foul odor of mold and decay filled the room. Ming grabbed whatever objects were within reach and threw them at his hideous assailant. With a slight flick of its wrist, the repulsive creature effortlessly deflected the broken chairs and pieces of rope that Ming threw at it. Despite having bestial strength, the monster moved slowly and advanced in small hopping motions. Ming knew full well that the hideous beast that confronted him was a Jiangshi, the feared Chinese vampire. He fled into the temple courtyard and climbed a large tree. The vampire continued to glare at him from the threshold of the temple as if paralyzed. He stood there until morning, staring at Ming, but dared not set foot outside the temple. At daybreak, when the sun's rays poured over the horizon and crossed the temple threshold touching the vampire, it vanished into a cloud of smoke. Several villagers appeared in the courtyard and found Ming still in the tree, struck with terror. He told them what had happened, and they exchanged knowing glances. They explained that the temple had been haunted by the evil Jiangshi since the time of their great-grandfathers, which is why the temple was only used for spring and autumn holidays and shunned the rest of the year. The vampire was believed to be the temple priest from a century before, who was a wicked man that stole from the temple and used evil magic to strike fear into the hearts of the villagers. They didn't know the location of the priest's body, so they couldn't dispatch the vampire according to traditional methods. Their only defense was to plant jujube trees in the temple courtyard, to which vampires have a strong aversion. Ming understood immediately that this was the reason the vampire was not able to leave the temple. Once he regained his composure, Ming remembered the exact location from which the vampire had risen from under the temple floor. He told the villagers, and together they removed the heavy stones in front of the altar and excavated deep into the earth, where they found the desiccated remains of a large man dressed in the robes of a Taoist priest. The corpse was covered in green mold and a coat of fine white hair. The villagers built a pyre in the courtyard and tossed the remains of the wicked vampire into its consuming flames. Blood began to pour from its mouth, and violent shrieks erupted from the Jiangshi that had been dead for over a century. The painful moaning died down as the flames consumed the body. Finally there was silence, and the vampire was no more, and from that day forth the temple was never haunted again. Ming and his descendants prospered, and today they are among the richest families in Asia. Many people believe Ming was blessed by the star gods for ridding the temple of the evil vampire that had held it hostage. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of The Night Visitors. I particularly like this story because it highlights the differences between Chinese vampires and their European counterparts. The Jiangshi of China tends to be a hideous creature that, while very strong, moves in sluggish and jagged hopping motions, whereas the European vampire is more human in appearance and can move quite quickly and gracefully. Also, while the Western vampire is repelled by religious iconography and generally speaking cannot set foot on holy ground, no such restrictions exist for Chinese vampires, and as in tonight's story, they have often been known to take up residence in temples. It is also believed that particularly skilled Taoist priests and practitioners of Chinese folk religion can control vampires through the use of mystical symbols and talismans. Thank you for listening. You can find The Night Visitors on your favorite podcast platform as well as YouTube. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter, where you will receive each week's episode directly in your inbox, as well as articles on vampire lore and vampires in popular culture. A special thanks to composer Tim Kulig for our intro music, Haunted House. If you like the podcast, follow me on Instagram for notifications of upcoming episodes.